Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where we're covering the Norwegian American Defense Industry Council. And we have with us Jeff Bialos, who was the Clinton administration's Defense Industrial Affairs Chief. You're now with Eversheds Sutherland. I remember your old firm, so I was almost getting tripped up on that. You've written extensively on transatlantic policy, defense industrial issues. You're obviously a lawyer that's in this space. Associated with the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Talk to us a little bit about some of the concerns. You know, you and a number of others, there was a little bit of concern about the Buy American, Build American rhetoric that came from the president. Folks are saying that there's a lot of political, electoral, panders to voters. But what are some of the challenges that creates at a time when the United States has truly drawing from a global defense industrial base?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. The president really faces... there's really a dichotomy here. On the one hand, he's gone after Boeing and Lockheed, asserting that, the prices need to come down, and that's best value buying. And I have no problem with tweeting as a means of lending itself to more affordability in the defense marketplace. And he picked on two appropriate programs to do that in, the Joint Strike Fighter, where there's a long history of cost overruns, and the presidential aircraft, where the requirements are driving very high development costs, all right? But if you want to get value for money on the one hand, the question is why you're going to do more Buy America and more restrictions on the defense side, because that's going to lead you to second best solutions. And I do have a concern about that, and the notion that there's an office in the White House, the Trade Council, that has a deputy on, that has Buy America is a concern. Traditionally, White Houses have opposed adding Buy America rules, and members of Congress have wanted various kinds of things included, like Christmas trees on various authorization and appropriation bills. I guess I have a little bit of a concern here that without the White House as a backstop, it may be open season on the next appropriation and authorization bill. Hopefully the appropriators will fight back that. But look, we have defense procurement MOUs with a lot of our allies. That's important to have allied cooperation in a range of areas, and they provide us with best value, and there's a quid pro quo there. Those are elective agreements. The U.S. could withdraw from them. I would think the Pentagon would not want to do that because it leads to second best buying.
What kind of global defense industrial strategy would you like to see from the new administration? If you were advising them, what would you advise them? What kind of structure and thinking should they adopt in an increasingly fast-moving, globalized world?
Well, look, the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, company A or company B. It has to set, its role is to set the environment. And if you want, at the end of the day, you want innovation and affordability in your programs. And the way you get that is through competition and allowing foreign parties to participate and allowing more commercial sources of supply to participate in our industrial base.
If you were advising the President, the National Trade Council, or the Pentagon leadership on defense industrial strategy, what's the kind of defense industrial strategy that the United States is going to need going to an increasingly globalized, increasingly competitive, increasingly fast-moving technological world?
Look, the question is, what do we want? We want the best things for our warfighter, and we want them rapidly. We want innovation, and we want affordability, and we want speed and agility in providing those affordable and technically great solutions. How do you get that? You get that through having as much competition as you can in defense markets, and the president's right. If you're going to have more Boeing compete with the F-35 through asymmetric competition, that's a helpful thing, all right? You get that through having foreign participation in our supplier base and not shutting foreign solutions out. And you get that through allowing more commercial participation in our supplier base. And look, the DoD has the tools to do those things. And I would like to see them bring some senior people into the AT&L management who are not risk averse and who are willing to use the available tools like other transaction authority, like commercial item buying, shake it up a bit, and to really make some changes and get the system more adroit and more quick. And I have a paper coming out in a month, and you can see the details. That's an advertisement.
That's an advertisement, and once the paper is out, we'll talk to you again because you're not going to give us too many of the details on that yet. But in a nutshell, can you give us what sort of the key theme of your paper is going to be?
The key theme of my paper is, SpaceX just landed a launch vehicle for the second time. The Pentagon the Air Force made SpaceX's life miserable. We need to make it less Herculean for the next SpaceX to participate in the defense market.
We'll look for the detailed breakdown of that when your paper comes out. Let me take you to the question of, everything from the universe of offsets and all of the other minor things that can make defense lives miserable. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the CFIUS process. Let me talk to you first about that. You're a lawyer that's represented international and defense. You sat on the other side of it in the Pentagon, where the Pentagon voice was a key one into the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which is overseen by the Treasury Department. As you look at foreign acquisitions in the United States, there is this concern about trying to control Chinese acquisition while trying to still keep it open for nations, or relatively open for allies. What's some of the recommendations you would make there? Because there's a concern by some that there could be a really tightening of the ability for foreign companies to invest in the United States at a time when some are very interested in expanding their footprint here in the United States.
Well, look, I think generally the president's approach, America first, right, more jobs, lends itself to good foreign investment. All right, so I think the general thrust you would hope and expect would be good. Now, CFIUS is sort of an exception to that rule, which is, are there special cases where there's special national security circumstances that, it would impair our security to allow an investment? And the biggest user of CFIUS in the last several years has been China, frankly. And I don't think I worry too much about that what we do for one country is going to affect another, because these are case-by-case determinations looking at what country do you trust, and with what countries you have congruent policies, and within that context, do you trust company A from country B to own this sensitive asset, essentially? And so it's sufficiently case by case. And with China, we've had concerns. Most of the Chinese deals have gone through, by the way, I should add, okay?
Or for purely commercial things like Smithfield Foods or something like that.
Right, and even though they've had political noise surrounding them, the ones that haven't have been ones where either the Chinese were in some high-tech area like cyber or semiconductors, because there's concern about them even being in enabling things to defense trade. There's a concern about when they've seen a Chinese company buy something near a UAV facility or a lab or someplace sensitive, they worry about the possibility of espionage, all right? Those are the issues. Now, there's a report that just came out from a group on the Hill, a commission that looks at China about state-owned enterprises and do we trust them? And the other set of concerns, and it's a major concern, and one the Pentagon's focused on, is the intrusion into our companies and their intellectual property. And there's a fear that ownership will allow foreign owners, despite all the controls you can put in place, to essentially mole in, and at some point later down the line, when there's an air hole in defense, take the technology out. Now, you can do that if you own it or you don't, but there's a concern about that, and I think the concern is largely focused on China.
You are an acknowledged skeptic of the third offset strategy. You and I have been at many conferences together where you have, given your thoughtful take on why you think it's a little bit misguided. What's the kind of advice? Obviously there's a lot of debate whether or not this administration is going to pick up what the last administration began. Obviously it was a high priority for Bob Work, for Ash Carter. What are some of your views? How do you think the new administration ought to be approaching any matter about third offset or future or innovation and that whole regime?
I think there ought to be a requiem for the third offset, and then we ought to move on, and it ought to go up on the shelf with other theories like it. Defense transformation, remember that? Look, I applaud the effort that was made to focus on, how's our edge, do we have it, and how do we maintain it going forward? And, it unleashed some processes that were constructive. My issues with the offset are multiple. One, I'm not even clear we'll be able to have a across-the-board offset anymore. You know, offsets made sense when you had a folder-gap threat. Now we've got multiple threats. It's hard to believe one thing is going to lead to generate a quote-unquote offset. Two,
And one of the other points you've made was, right, that was during a Cold War when Russia could not access and didn't have the industrial means to produce it, right?
that's right. And the whole theory of why our second offset, as Mr. Rourke calls it, is eroding is because of the diffusion of technology, okay? He then takes the view that I believe, he says, the third offset is going to be artificial intelligence and autonomy. My problem with that is, how do you know? I mean, these are technologies that are broadly available. They're dispersing as we speak. They're bound to be ubiquitous. Isn't it contrary to the very notion of why we have an eroding second offset to say that the third offset, we're going to get an offset for autonomy and artificial intelligence? No doubt they're going to be part of the force. Very debatable at best. We're going to get a military edge from a technology that's going to be largely ubiquitous.
So what's your recommendation for what direction they ought to be going into, whether it's on innovation or thinking about future threats?
And again, you'll have to read my paper in depth, but I think we need balance. My biggest concern about the offset was every program at the Pentagon had a chart with offset on it. And I think we need a balance between nuclear R&D, conventional, and irregular. All right? And I have no problem. We should do technologies for near-peer competitors, but it has to be in balance. And my concern was, after 7 years of moving away from irregular warfare, I think offset was pushing it further away, and I don't think that's good given the nature of the range of threats we're likely to face.
You're reminding me about when the transformation, and not to date myself, but the transformation debate was going on, and Don Rumsfeld at a meeting said, pretty soon a toilet's going to be called transformational as well.
That's the issue. That's one of the issues with offsets. It's like also people follow it. It becomes like lemmings. You know, you say offset, and everybody runs to justify their program as an offset. And it has this sort of pernicious implication. But I worry that it tilted the meter too much toward the near-peer competitor, and it tilted the meter too much toward autonomy and artificial intelligence.
And let me take you to innovation. What do you think is the best approach to innovation? You deal in technology, highly sensitive technologies on a daily basis as part of your job as a prominent Washington attorney. What do you think the right technology strategy would be for the Pentagon?
Well, I don't think there's no one-size-fits-all for these threats. You have to have you have to invest in a range of technologies. You have to demonstrate a number of them from that broad range, and ultimately see which get to a technology readiness level that makes sense and then insert them. You know, the challenge to the Pentagon is as much about transitioning the interesting things we have at the front end of the innovation process than it is about accessing things that we don't have access to in the private sector.
And it's about breaking down barriers.
To some extent, yes.
Jeff, thanks very much, and we look forward to talking to you about your new paper.
Thank you. Take care.